Welcome to a large model Showman's engine, part 51, repairing and modifying the water gauge. Here's the engine outside my garage, in steam and ticking over nicely. And the good news is, I finally got the injector to work. What's this? Look, it's actually injecting water into the boiler. It's still dripping very slightly, but most of the water now goes into the boiler instead of onto the floor. And it was all down to curing air leaks. This is the water gauge, and in an entirely opposite direction. These are not air leaks, these are water leaks. The drain cock's leaking and the shut-off cock's leaking. I think it's time to take off the water gauge and fix all these small faults. I'll do my best to show the dismantling process. The trouble is though, this water gauge is in a very bad position for both myself and the camera. This clip shows it with the glass removed. And here I've removed the top part of the water gauge entirely. The lower part of the water gauge fitting was more difficult to remove. I just couldn't get a camera angle that worked. Eventually it was removed, and here it is in the workshop in a blue plastic box. Apologies for the video being a bit late today, but unfortunately I had to go to the doctor's for a blood test. Nothing serious, just a routine diabetes blood check. It would have been more fun if the nurse had been wearing a cloak, black on the outside and red on the inside, and had she resembled the famous actor, the late Christopher Lee, it would have been even better. Anyway, it's on with the job. This is the gauge glass, and as you can clearly see, it's dirty on the outside as well as on the inside. This is a special gauge glass. It has a red line inside it like on a thermometer, and it makes it much easier to see the water level. Here I'm attempting to clean the inside of the glass using some acid taken from my acid bath. And just in case you don't know, this stuff is called Kilrock K, and it's kettle descaler, but it's not normally green, it's just been in there a long time. The rest of the brass fittings are also going to go into the acid. But before that, it's top tip time. I need to clean off all the oil and grime that covers the fittings from years of being on the traction engine. A good way to do this is to use some T-cut on a cloth. As T-cut is abrasive, the combination of the cloth and the T-cut easily cleans off all the grime in the hard-to-get-to corners of the fittings. I'm also using some Scotch-Brite to cut through the really stubborn areas. In no time at all, the fitting is ready to go into the acid, and hopefully the acid will dissolve the grime on the outside of the fitting as well as any limescale on the inside. I've only put the top fitting into the acid because I need to do some work on the bottom one. The taper on this is really not sealing at all. All it does is constantly dribble. I'm going to use some T-cut in an attempt to relap the taper plug into the taper hole. And while I'm at it, I'm going to enlarge the waterways through this fitting, because on both the top and bottom fitting the waterways are too small and the water gauge is very slow to react. I drilled out the fitting using a small drill bit. Then I continued the lapping process, and here I'm fitting the special shaped ring on the other end. In this clip I'm testing the fit of the taper plug in the taper hole, and as you can see it's leaking badly. So I tightened the securing nut, and guess what? The thread broke off. I'm being a bit flippant about this, that's because in the wings I have a replacement water gauge. But I'd rather successfully repair the one that I have. So I drilled a hole exactly in the centre of the square part, threaded the hole 4BA, applied some Loctite 603 and fitted a 4BA brass bolt into the hole that I drilled and tapped. I made sure it was very tight by using a pair of pliers. Then I just chopped the head off the bolt and cleaned up the thread, and here it is. It looks as good as new to me. It's obvious that I need to grind the taper plug and socket a bit more. For this I'm using some very fine valve grinding paste mixed with some T-cut. Then I rotated the plug many times in the socket. Before reassembly I thoroughly cleaned the parts. I used some cellulose thinners or lacquer thinner in this small polythene tub. And here are the clean parts ready to go back together. After assembly I tested it, and now the taper plug cock is not leaking at all. I can only just stop the compressed air from blowing out of the ends of the fitting. I should have done this before the lapping process, but never mind. I then drilled out the fitting. First the bottom fitting, and here the top fitting. This is what the gauge needed. The holes through the gauge were far too small. In exactly the same way as I did with the lower fitting, I ground in the taper plug into the tapered hole, First of all, using some T-cut. To be honest, this job is a bit tedious, so I hope it doesn't leak when I put it back together. If it does, I have this water gauge to fit, a far better device. The threads are not right, but that's easily fixable. It looks to me like the original water gauge top fitting has some sort of a BSP thread. And just in case you don't know, that stands for British Standard Pipe. I had to make a slightly thicker washer because I had to grind the taper plug quite a bit more on the top fitting to get it to seat. But mechanically, both of these should work fine now. I'll give this one a compressed air test. And once again, there's about 40 pounds per square inch in the pipe. I'm having to really put some pressure on the ends to stop them leaking. But the main thing is the taper plug is airtight. This is the blowdown valve, and it's a slightly different construction. The taper plug is made from stainless steel. I lapped this in place just using T-cut, and it appears to be fine, no leaks at all. Which is more than can be said, before I started the job, when just about every moving part of the bottom fitting and the top fitting leaked. I think before I refit the water gauge after I've cleaned it up, I'm going to clean the boiler backhead and most of the area around the water gauge. Another thing I'm going to do is make another simple water gauge protector. This is one of two parts that fit in to make the protector. The black lines are unimportant because this glass has a red line on it. That's it for this episode. COVID-19 is on the rise, so stay safer, stay well. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Mainsteam Models website and click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you can find other videos that you may like to watch. And by using the playlists, you can actually watch the videos back to back.